And the question broadly is, how would you like to see Clunes evolve in the next 30 years? What are some of the things that you think would really help the community grow and thrive in a sustainable way?
And I think sustainable is the most important word, because our environment, the place we live in, is really important. We do have the issue now of global warming. So this means that we can't have gardens as we used to. The other issue is that some people do put in bores, but I do have a bit of an issue with bores because you are taking out of the aquifer. I think it's more important that we develop sustainable gardens through a knowledge of what plants to use and what plants will be most effective in our gardening and in the environment for bees, bugs and all the good things that nature has to provide for us.
And there are ways that people in this area do garden really well despite rainfall, despite any sort of changing levels in rainfall. What are some of the techniques that you see as being really useful and quite straightforward in implementing for working in complementary ways with the existing environment?
Well, for a start, in a garden, you need to have good soil. Now, unfortunately, it's not cheap. You know, to bring in soil, to bring in the elements that you need to bring in to plant well, we need to have soil, and that's expensive. But in saying that, if you can't afford to do it, you can do it on a smaller scale by using mulch. Mm-hmm. And I think, to me, the most important thing is mulch in your garden. I was talking to a friend recently and we were discussing, if I was writing up a diary about my garden, and she said, well, you could call it continue to mulch, and that is the real element that you need to do. We're fortunate we can get straw around here at a really reasonable price. It's not the very, very best option, but given that if you keep adding to it, you do get some weed, but it's not too bad. But in time, you'll gradually have a very nice, friable soil. Some places it'll take longer than others, but I'm not saying that's the best option. But when you can't bring in soil, then that's the best way to go.
And compost?
Compost, yes, making your own compost. I'm not a very good composter. Some people are really good at it. I actually have little compost bins in my veggie patches. I have what's just a pipe, and it's dug into the ground. There are holes underneath for the worms to be able to move back and forth, and I just put veggie scraps in there, and I'll put some straw or some other dry materials, and it doesn't take long for that to decompose, especially in the hot weather. So yes, composting in whatever form. I do lots of dry composting though. I put all my weeds and so forth together, and if you water that occasionally, it's surprising, in a short time you will have some really nice soil underneath which you can add to your garden, your veggie patch or whatever. Use your coffee grinds, anything that you've got which is a natural product, or any of that will be good on the garden.
And it feels so rewarding to be doing that cyclical process as opposed to just chucking something in landfill.
No,
and it goes nowhere. So that's a really great strategy, good idea.
Yeah.
How do you see people with constraints or limitations on the kinds of ideal gardening routines that they can have? For example, new people moving into the area, if they're working and busy with children, raising families, or people who are elderly and perhaps aren't as capable as they used to be with physical labour. Are there ways that you've seen other communities or this community get together and pool its resources?
Yeah, I think there is an issue when you have limited time and families impact on that. I suggest small areas, don't try and do too much, and think about what it is you want to do. Herbs are really easy to grow in most cases, and that in itself is so good for the environment because they're aromatic. That means you're producing good bugs, also the bees. If you have lavender, there are a host of other things, marjoram, oregano, any of those sorts of things. Not difficult to grow and not water. Yeah, they do need some water in the summer, but they don't need to have constant watering at all. And if you've mulched well, then you'll find that they'll survive really well. So yes, we can all do something. We can have. I don't have small pots. I think that's really hard in our climate because they dry quickly. But I have big old metal rubbish bins which I put herbs in. I grow things like perennial spinach, which keeps going for a long period of time and it's always there. So think of the things that you might like to grow, which you would use, and maybe put in one tomato, but don't try and put in a massive veggie patch. If you can't manage it. It's all going to die. For people who are older, then that's a much more significant problem because of maybe ability to just bend and move around. But then if you're able to get in raised garden beds, that helps that sort of situation a lot.
Yeah.
And you can again, just grow a few things for yourself. People will say to me, oh, but I don't need all those veggies. I said, well, you don't need to grow that. You can just grow a small row of beans or one tomato or spinach, whatever it is that you really like to grow. You don't have to have a massive veggie patch. And as a single person, you'd still reap the rewards of it being organic for a start. And hopefully you wouldn't use sprays or limit the amount of spraying you do. And so that's going to be better for the environment and for you. You're helping the bees. And if you've got lavender or other herbs nearby, you're going to have a lot of bee activity. I'm at the moment growing a curry plant, and it's just beautiful to walk around the garden. I'm using it not in my herb patch, but in my normal ornamental garden, and just the smell as you go past is just beautiful. So if it's smelling beautiful, that it's very good for the environment because it will attract certain bees, bugs, whatever, to them.
And therapeutic.
Therapeutic, yes. Yes, don't ever forget that's the part I love the best every morning. Is walking around the garden, checking it all out, and it really sets me up for the day. It might be some days I can spend 5 minutes, but often I spend a half an hour walking around and checking things out, which is a bit obsessive, I suppose, but also
it's a nice way to clear the mind and
It
gather
is.
your thoughts. And
that's exactly right. So I think anybody, it doesn't matter who they are, if you want a little garden or you want a patch to grow something in, you can do this. It doesn't have to be big.
And we can have programs in aged care facilities and primary schools, secondary schools, where these sort of practices are sort of just part of the daily routines.
Yes, and the education starts when children are young, because that's where my education started. Being aware of climate change is so important, that we have to have gardens that are sustainable so we do not have to water them all the time, because we haven't had any water restrictions as such for a number of years, but that time will come again. And what happens then? If we have all these beautiful gardens with plants in and you can't water them, or they get very minimum water, but if you've established a garden and you've kept mulching the soil, well, eventually you get a very lovely friable soil. I have read somewhere where there was a garden that they started up in the hills somewhere out of Melbourne, so they would get better rainfall than we would get. But when they started this garden, they took out 2 metres depth of soil, of what the original soil, and put in proper composted soil, whatever it was. And they said the deeper the soil, of course, the better the plants would grow. So then you get back to the soil again. It is the most important thing. And also looking at your sun. In our climate, a lot of plants do not need full sun all day because we get this really intense heat for a lot of January, February, and the plants really get very sad. They'll dry off. So if you've got a bit of shade, or they get shade for some of the day, it does really help with their lifespan, and they look a lot better during the summer.
And it's good. It's something that's good for people as a regular practice to be involved with gardening. So can you see how gardening has implications in other areas of life?
Your health, I think it's a big thing. I mean, you're bending, you're moving all the time, and I think it's. I mean, I know that's not quite like going to the gym or going for long walks, but I don't have a pedometer, but I imagine some days I do many kilometres in a day, checking things out. And so yes, your long-term health, for your physical health, your mental health, emotional health, all of those benefit from having a garden and spending regular time. Trying not to just make it, I've got to go out now because there's a lot of weeds out there and I need to get rid of them. That's not necessarily going to benefit you. But if you can put a regular time aside and think, I'll go out there today and spend a half an hour.
It's more gentle.
Yeah, it is. And if you think, well, you've mulched well, then it won't be so difficult to weed. And anyway, a few weeds here and there don't really matter. You know, no garden is pristine unless you happen to be able to employ a gardener, because the weeds can appear very quickly. So that's not the issue. I think taking your time and having time to smell the roses, so to speak. Making sure that you're enjoying what you're doing and it's not just a chore.
At the moment, we enjoy sort of like low density living. Can you imagine in the next 30 years if this area becomes more popular and more populated as a result? What would be some of the principles that you'd like to maintain or develop in terms of environmentalism?
Yeah, well, I suppose in the end, if we've got higher density living, the thing I'd love to do here would be to put on a rooftop garden, but I don't know, not the whole house, but a section, especially the lean-to that's just here, which would help with the insulation and also environmentally would help. I don't think we've done enough research on that yet. There are people who do this sort of activity, but how expensive it is and all the logistics, what you actually plant and so forth, I don't really know. But that's one way in which people can still work environmentally in a smaller space and plant things. And I'm sure even with our very high temperatures that we have, there'd be still things that we could grow in a rooftop garden that would survive. At the moment I'm sort of working with, in England they use sedum a lot, and I'm not talking about the bigger sedums, I'm talking about the little ground cover ones. So I've got a whole range of them I've grown in the garden in a way that how could I use them as a ground cover to keep the moisture in and to keep, so
Is that the one that also has a beautiful flower that stripes?
most of these have got a very small white or yellow flower. They're generally very
autumn joy?
No, autumn. I do grow autumn joy, good flowers, and Matrona sedums, but they're a bigger growing plant.
Okay.
They are excellent for the garden. But we need to still be aware. A lot of people think, oh, it's all about succulents, but I'm not. I don't say don't grow succulents, but you've got to think of things that are really going to be more beneficial to your garden. But something like a rooftop garden, where you need to have something that's going to be very, very good in all sorts of weathers, and you've got to think of your frost and so forth. You need to have something there that will really keep, which will grow well.
So for developments of residency housing and things like that, is it a matter of insisting on incorporating green principles into design and into building, rather than seeing the cost as the primary motive, seeing the environment as something essential for long-term sustainability? So maybe all well and good to raise some cheap housing in the short term, but in a few years down the track, it's actually detracting from people's lifestyles and the positive things we really enjoy from living in a regional environment. Yeah,
and I think it's, dare I say, it's the neat and tidy aspects that people get, sort of hooked into as well, and it must be neat and it's all. But gardens are creative beings, and they keep growing and they keep evolving. So if we're going to have cheap housing and smaller areas for our gardens, we need to think of things that will be good for the environment as examples for people, rather than just putting in 6 roses and a couple of shrubs. And I'm not saying that you don't do that, but I'm just saying that the potential is much, much greater than that, and there's so much out there that we can use and that we can do that, really. It's a disappointing. And maybe developers need to have plans for people, because a lot of people don't know anymore. They weren't brought up with gardens. I was brought up from a family who came off the land, and in fact a lot of my family are on the land still, and my grandparents and uncles and aunts lived on the land, so it was part of you. But that's gone now. I'm very aware that most people have no idea, so they actually have to be told what to do. And it's not a matter of a designer coming in and doing this beautiful sort of garden. It's thinking about what is going to be best for the environment and what is going to be best over a long period.
So it's scientific